Proust said that the real voyage of discovery consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. My voyage started when I was pretty young. I wasn't living a pleasant situation at home, and as a lonely child, I had developed a huge imagination. I spent a lot of time alone, and I was imagining most of the times being invisible and enter the houses of my friends and see how it was about living in their families, how they were having dinner together. And I've always seen a lot of stories in my mind. And even today, if we go outside at a restaurant, I'm very likely to listen to what's happening at the table next to ours and try to imagine what brings those people together, if they are married, if they are happy with their lives. When I was living in the Netherlands in 2007, I was studying there, I discovered photography. And through photography, I managed to give a shape to the stories that I had in my mind. Photography helped me a lot in connecting with strangers and perceive the humanity in their little gestures. It also helped me a lot to express myself as a shy person that prefers to express herself with images rather than words, as I'm doing now. Back then, I was studying rural development, and I was faced with the challenge of writing a thesis, but I also fell in love with photography. So I was desperate trying to find a match between the two, something like writing a thesis on rural photography. But it was kind of impossible, so I went to the rector to find out what I could do. And the rector asked me what I wanted to do after the master. And I very honestly answered that I wanted to travel the world and ask people what made them happy. Unfortunately, I had to write my thesis, and I couldn't do that. So I ended up writing a thesis analyzing those approaches that use the rhetoric of the voice of the poor and claim that bringing the very voice of the poor and their stories to the table of policymakers is really empowering, so that the poor have a say in the policy debate. But I found out that such approaches are not actually contributing to the participation of the poor in social change, but are rather appropriating their lived realities of poverty for institutional gains. So basically, I saw how, especially northern-based NGOs, were using the lives and the stories of the poor to legitimize the role of their institution in the broader narrative of development. So this was quite disappointing for me, and I decided to abandon the idea of matching photography with development or rural development. But in my concrete work life, I was continuously exposed to life stories and the use of images. I've always been at the intersection between working with communities, attending meetings, giving boring presentations, or sitting in air-conditioned offices in London or UN headquarters. And since my very first experience when I was 18 as a volunteer in a rural community in Ecuador, I felt pretty uncomfortable with something. I felt that I wasn't able to relate to the people with whom I was sharing my life with in that moment as humans. I was looking at them through my professional lens. I was just starting to study rural development. So those people for me were, first of all, poor rural Andean farmers rather than human beings. And even today in my work life, I feel that as development professionals or professional change makers, somehow we fail in connecting with the lives and the humans that are often just the object of our work. But in the end, when you talk to people, whether they are poor farmers in Guatemala or UN people, like in this case, we are having drinks with the former UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, when you talk to people, you just realize that we are all humans. We all share emotions, struggles, we all have regrets, dreams, and we are just unique like everyone else. So how can we actually enter into a relation with strangers, people living far from ourselves, and relate to them beyond the role that we assign to ourselves and to them? How can we learn to mirror ourselves in their emotions, in their struggles? The ideal thing would be to meet them, to talk to them, to spend time with them. Theodore Zeldin said that the most important changes in human histories have occurred through individuals developing deeper understanding of the perspectives and experience of others. And he found that conversation is the best way to go. And he developed a way to have strangers meeting and talking about their lives at a very deep and emotional level. Photography, videos, storytelling is a powerful tool that is being used to connect people and to start creating this understanding. I'm not saying anything new. It's been used in politics for long. You may know this man. This is the former Italian Prime Minister, Silvio Berlusconi. Maybe you don't know his mother, but we Italians know his mother because he has always brought his personal life into the public realm. And this was a very successful, unfortunately, case of being able to have citizens identifying themselves with the leader. Stories are used by NGOs, for instance, to raise funds, to let people understand or imagine what life in poverty and conflict could be. This project, Humans of New York, is now become so popular that you have even humans of Tehran, humans of every city in the world. This guy is walking around the streets of Brooklyn and asking completely strangers if they want to share their lives, their stories with the entire world. And this project is becoming so popular that every story of a single person generates a lot of comment threads of people talking about their personal experience also. Photography in this case is being used in this project in Barcelona to let people know who is living behind the walls in our neighborhood. Photography is used also to challenge perceptions. In this case, this photographer traveled to a Latino immigrant community in southern US and is documenting the lives of the children when they are at home, and is bringing those images and those stories to the teachers in the classroom, teachers that never wonder what is the life of these children beyond the school. This project aims to be the hugest public library of human experience. There are 70,000 stories, and every day people from every corner of the world are uploading their personal stories and images. So when I see this and all the images that I've shown so far, I feel that we are overwhelmed by stories and by images. If we are so overwhelmed by stories and images, the risk is that the people that are living those stories are perceived as characters rather than as humans, first of all. If you see this famous painting from the Italian Renaissance, at least when I see this painting, without people, I can see the people there, because I've seen this image so many times that somehow I can already figure out what is the story about. And I feel the same in my work. I feel that I've read so many stories about development, about change, about misery, about empowerment, that somehow I already know how the story goes. In the case of this image, I don't need an Indonesian farmer or a Greenpeace activist to tell me what's happening there. I see a story of eviction, land grabbing, palm oil plantation, deforestation. But maybe this is just my view. For instance, my father traveled to Malaysia, and when he came back, he said, you should see how they care about the environment in Malaysia because it's full of palm trees. So maybe the story changes according to who is telling that story. In this case, we have African farmers that are happy. They are sharing their story about how they are managing to face climate change through smart agriculture. But actually, this story is not being told by the farmers. It's being told by Monsanto and its smart agriculture program. This Romanian woman, she's sharing her life story. She's telling the Romanian public how miserable is her life and how the investment of a mining company in her area would benefit herself, her livelihood, and the life of her children. So we see the story of this woman in her house, in her kitchen, taking care of her children and complaining about her life. This story, this interview was broadcast through the Romanian television until they found out that the woman was paid by the mining company itself. So when we see all these stories, what we see is that either we are overwhelmed by stories, repetitive, standardized stories. We somehow already know how the story goes, and we tend to confuse the people in the stories with characters rather than with human beings. And we also see corporations appropriating those stories for their own institutional gain. In all this competition to tell stories in compelling formats, what space is left and what kind of space is left for the people that are living those stories? There are not characters, there are real people struggling and claiming to live a life in dignity. A famous Italian reporter that has lived and traveled throughout Asia for 30 years, he has seen and written many stories. And at a certain point of his career, at least around the end of his career, he said that, I feel that everything has already been said and written. Sometimes that everything is still to be said. There are approaches that engage communities, marginalized communities, to tell their stories in their own words, choosing the means of expression that they feel more comfortable with. There are many examples of this, but again, I wonder who is listening to those stories and what's the risk of these stories to be seen just as merely interesting anecdotes and their message to be depoliticized. However, apart from these skepticisms that I might have, I believe that it's still important to keep on telling stories because the very act of telling stories is really powerful for those who are given the chance to tell their story. So we should keep on telling stories, but in a way that we don't lose the message of the story and also the people in the story. Last week, we have seen this beautiful art project that is giving Mexican farm workers in Vermont, US, the opportunity to tell the story of their journey, the opportunity to channel their struggles and their hopes through pieces of art. But we have also seen how this is not just an art project. Those people have been given the opportunity to become visible not only through the art, but also through their very presence in public meetings, in public events with all the citizens of the community. They are sharing their experiences in schools. And so they are not only bringing their art to express themselves, they are bringing their person and started to engage in conversations with other citizens, so helping to channel the misconception that citizens might have around these invisible people. So life stories are powerful tools. They transcend boundaries of languages and experiences. They help us start connecting with people that we would never approach probably on the street. They help us understand their worldviews. But when we are oversaturated by story and images, there's the risk of undermining their potential and lose the humans inside the story. When I take pictures myself, I tend to be so much fascinated and captured by the beauty of human details and how humans express their emotions through the details of their eyes, of their face, that I somehow disconnect from the human of the picture. So it's just an object, it's not a subject. And I tend to forget that the very person, the very humans that I shoot are actually bearing a story that I might know only if I talk to them, if I listen to them, if I engage in a conversation with them. During these days of intense sharing that we all had, I've tried to practice something that is really challenging for somebody who is really obsessed with images. I've tried to close my eyes while I was listening to you. And for just a couple of seconds, I managed to do that. But for those moments, I was no longer a woman. I was no longer a development professional working on land rights. I was no longer a GESA participant. I was just there. I was present. I was listening to you. I was connected. And I was able to see with my eyes closed. So we may be oversaturated by images and stories, but hopefully we will never be oversaturated by meaningful conversations, also with strangers. And I feel that we don't need more stimulus. We need more presence and more connection. And we may need to learn to see with our closed eyes, learn to listen, learn to connect beyond our roles and our assumptions to be able to see with new eyes. Thank you.